Hey guys, what's up? It's Jay, and today we're going to talk about 5 underrated films about real life serial killers that you can watch for free. Now, these are great movies, and I don't think a lot of people have seen them. We're going to start off with a classic at number one. It's Angst from 1983. A lot of people think this film's German. It's actually Austrian. I'm not sure how much difference that makes, but Angst is the true story of Werner Kinzig, who is a guy who he's not truly classified as a serial killer. I think they classify him as a mass murderer, but his story is interesting because he was convicted of murder and then paroled. And the whole thing is the first day this guy got out of prison, he was looking for somebody to kill. I mean, he did not try to fight his urges to hurt somebody at all. And he happened upon a family of three, a disabled man and a couple women, and yeah, things get pretty hairy. The camera work in this film is amazing. It was actually banned throughout Europe in 1983 after it was released, and so it was probably another decade or 15 years before anybody really saw it. And I just remember it from the first time I seen it, thinking how great it was and how absolutely terrifying it is, because this is like your biggest fear, this guy. Because let's say you're, the average guy, you're at work, your sister, your mother, your disabled grandfather, whatever, they're at home. You're out trying to do what you can for your family, and some psycho walks in off the street and just destroys your entire life. And the film is terrifying. But it's a good movie. That's Angst from 1983. Let's move on. Our number two movie is called The Golden Glove. Now, this is a really despicable film, but it's based on a true story. And it is the true story of German serial killer Fritz Honka. And I've seen several things about Fritz since watching this movie because it was just so interesting that he got away with the things that he got away with. It's because he was in a homeless community in Hamburg, and they all hung out at this bar called the Golden Glove. And a lot of people there didn't even have a home; they would just go out and hustle for money and come back and get drinks. The bar was open 24 hours a day, and this was Fritz's hunting ground because he did have an apartment and he had a regular job. He was an alcoholic though, but he was able to lure women who had basically nothing and nowhere to go back to his apartment where he would do terrible, horrible things to these people. And when it was all said and done, there was a fire in Fritz's apartment building. And when the fire department showed up, they found 5 bodies inside the walls of his apartment. And he was living around hundreds of other people. And they were all complaining, but at a certain point, nobody cared because it's a slum and Fritz paid his rent every month. Now, the interesting thing about this movie, I found out more about this case going on, and it actually became a huge tourism thing in Germany because the rich people, after this event happened, would go down to Hamburg to the poor district and go to the bars and buy drinks for everybody and have them. Hey, did you know Fritz? Tell us stories about Fritz. And so yeah, it's a very interesting social study too, besides just a serial killer story. So let's move on, guys. Our next movie is the Snowtown Murders. This is from 2011, and this is a very interesting one from Australia, and it's kind of got like a cult feel to it too. The It's based on what they called the Barrel Murders, and it was committed by this trio of guys: John Bunting, who was basically in charge, Robert Wagner, and another guy named James Velasquez. And they were kind of like his flunkies, and he was in charge. Whatever he said went. And this started out as they were picking on pedophiles. They were going out and finding people. I don't know if you could pick on pedophiles, but they were going out and finding people who they thought were pedophiles, whether they were or not, and they would take them back and torture them and murder them. And what happened was they eventually started like acquiring people's financial stuff too, and they went and bought a old bank in the middle of town and started taking people into the vault of the bank and hiding their bodies, torturing them. There's even talk that they even played out like the Reservoir Dogs scene where Michael Madsen does the dance with the straight razor. Apparently, John Bunting did this to somebody and tortured him to death like that. But yeah, that's it's a great story. I mean, as far as how these people moved through that society without being noticed until it got. I mean, because there was everybody around them was disappearing. They would get close to somebody, and then that person would disappear. Their whole family would disappear. So yeah, the Snowtown Murders from 2011. Check it out. Our next one. This one is like I think I'm probably one of the only people that really watched this movie. It's called The Freeway Killer from 2010, and it is the true story of serial killer William Bonin, who killed like 36 people in California in the 80s. But the really interesting thing about this story is there were several freeway killers, in California during the 80s and the 70s and even into the 90s. And there was also the Night Stalker, and you had Ed Kemper, and you had all these guys running around. So nobody really knows who killed who. They just kind of like try to identify the victims. Well, most of William Bonin's victims were young men, young male hitchhikers who were, out maybe even trying to prostitute or turn tricks or whatever. And he tricked them into getting his van, and he sadistically choked him. He was basically like a Gacy type character, but he had a murder van that once you got in that van, you wasn't getting out. That's all it was about. And he showed little remorse for any of his killings. It seemed like even years later, when he was on death row, he didn't care that he'd done this. He didn't care about the victims' families or anything. He joked about it. Yeah, he's a truly sadistic guy. The film is not that great. It's a low-budget B-movie film, but I thought I'd put it in here because it's one of the stories that seems to get left out a lot when they talk about serial killers for some reason. The guy strangled 36 people sadistically. So yeah, it's a very harrowing story. Moving on, our last free movie we're going to talk about is Hounds of Love. This one is also about Australian killers. It was written and made by Ben Young. This is his directorial debut, but it's loosely based on the crimes of David and Catherine Burney. And they sadistically kidnapped and tortured 5 young women in Perth, Australia. And it's just sick. This one is very much about how it's like the Ken and Barbie Canadian killers. What were their names? Carla Homolka, and I can't remember the other guy's name, but yeah, they're very much like they fed off each other. They enabled each other to do things, and it's an interesting thing to me. It's like, psychology wise, how people create their own truths, and as long as someone else validates that, then it allows you to go further and be more horrible and more twisted. So I think that movie, Hounds of Love, it's a hard watch, but it's an interesting crime drama. Okay, now last but not least, I'm gonna talk about this one. It's not free. I couldn't find it anywhere for free, but I think if you've never seen it, you want to check it out. It's called Memories of Murder, and the interesting thing about this movie is it was made in 2003 in South Korea, and it's about a string of murders, at least 10. They don't know how many. They're still trying to connect them all. And the interesting thing about this film is that the murders were not solved for another 15 years after this movie was made. So it's very impactful about what was going on at that time. Years later, and it's because of, I'm not, we got to get the Americans involved here somewhere, right? Well, they sent all the DNA off to America, and we tested it. And years later, when they found a suspect, they were able to confirm him as the killer of at least 4 of these women, and probably many, many more. And it's just a great police drama, and it kind of shows you how things work in other countries, how they're able to bend the rules, and then that doesn't always work so great for them. Memories of Murder from 2003. Check that out if you get a chance. It's worth the $3.99 if you got to go rent it. It's one of the few movies out there that I will say it's worth the $3.99. Don't wait for it to come on Tubi, because it may never. Guys, that's all we got for this week. 5 underrated films you can watch about real killers, and we will talk to you the next time we got something we're talking about. Today's my mom's birthday. Don't let me forget that. Happy birthday, Mom. We love you. And we'll talk to you guys next time we got something we're talking about. Bye.